Mary Lou loved to terrify her friends with scary stories, as their land was rich in spooky legends. This time, the 15-year-old told the story of the Phantom Truck. For decades, it has terrified local drivers to death. The truck suddenly appears backwards on the road and in the same position, with a loud thud, hits cars. As the panicked drivers realize the hopelessness of the situation, they begin to say goodbye to their lives. But then the truck disappears without a trace. Some get away with just a severe scare, while others go mad for life. The fear on the girls' faces gave way to carefree laughter and commotion in the evening. Cheerful and satisfied, Mary Lou got on her bicycle and raced home in time for supper. She was in such a hurry that she didn't notice a car coming around a sharp curve. At the last moment, Mary Lou took a sharp turn and pulled over to the side of the road. She looked frightened as the car nearly struck her. Looking up at the handlebars of her bicycle, Mary Lou found a man's hand on it, and she panicked and screamed in fear. The man's other hand instantly covered her mouth. The stranger dragged the girl into the woods with her bicycle. A couple of months later, her dead body was found tied to a tree. It was 1978. This incident was one of the many gruesome events occurring in the Bridgewater Triangle. It's an area in Massachusetts. The corners of the triangles are in 3 towns: Abington, Rehoboth, and Freetown. Mary Lou's killer was found relatively quickly. His name was James Cater. The only thing they failed to do was put him in jail for over a decade. People said he was linked to the dark forces of the triangle, and if you look into the judicial details of the case, it does start to look like there's something otherworldly going on. If the main villain and the devil's advocate had existed in real life, he would have been James Cater. This murderer has avoided punishment every time, defending himself with such ridiculous arguments as if he's a cunning and all-powerful devil. During the trial, the Mary Lou case was his second kidnapping. Fortunately, the first girl survived. Cater claimed that his previous crime could not prove the second. Surprisingly, it worked. In 1986, the court also failed to put the killer away, as it did in 1992. And the argument was about the same as the first time. It wasn't until 1996 that the court finally managed to give the girl's parents peace of mind and put the scoundrel away for life. The investigation uncovered one interesting detail that the police didn't reveal. It turned out that Cater was connected to a satanic cult running in the local woods. But there was very little information about him, only that witnesses to Satanist activity contacted the police back in 1980 when another murder was being investigated in the area. Perhaps the vagabond who died in the woods in 1987 knew something. After all, according to the police, he was killed because he was mistaken for an undercover cop. These cases are rather creepy, mysterious, and inexplicable, especially when considering Cater's trial. However, compared to the rest of the stories of the Bridgewater Triangle, they look ordinary and quite normal occurrences. The story of the truck that Mary Lou told her friends is still circulating among the locals. True, some report an entirely different ghost on the road. Along Highway 44, people often spot a hitchhiker with long red hair. When drivers stop to pick up the wanderer, he vanishes into thin air. Witnesses have also claimed that the red-haired hitchhiker would suddenly appear right on the roadway. Drivers would not have time to slow down, but the car would drive right through him. Only some lucky people managed to invite the ghost into their car, where they disappeared before they could talk to him. There's a chilling tale to tell, not just of roads and woods, but of many other places in the Triangle. Virtually every piece of land here has an evil spirit that has been terrorizing locals and tourists for centuries. Some parts of the towns of Danvers and Taunton are off limits to campers, while it's a delightful way to test yourself for tourists. Both towns have creepy abandoned mental hospitals. Some patient stories can make you lose your nerve to visit. Anthony Santo, as a child, went with his cousins to the woods within Brooklyn. The boy felt that everything was going wrong, but could not resist the voices in his head. As 18-year-old Frank and 12-year-old James were admiring the local beauty, Anthony launched several large rocks at their heads. James died on the spot, while Frank fell to the ground and tears welled up in his eyes from pain and incomprehension of what was happening. Then, Anthony pulled out a knife and stabbed his relative to death. He later stoned a random 6-year-old girl to death. He confessed to these crimes when he was 14, when he was caught stealing a bicycle. As the police found out, there were no cousins at all. But the boy was very sincere in his words, and there was no doubt that he had killed. Louise, a 6-year-old girl, did die, but it was probably not Anthony who killed her. The boy was admitted to a home for the mentally ill in Taunton, where he subsequently died. Other patients there tell similar, sometimes even bloodier stories. In Danvers, the situation is no better. Many visitors to dilapidated asylums in the Bridgewater Triangle reported being touched or forced inside. The Hornbine School, closed in Rehoboth in 1937, is also said to be haunted. A mystical halo has surrounded these places since time immemorial, before European man ever set foot on the land. In the local Hockomock Swamp, located at the center of the triangle, human artifacts found are up to 9,000 years old. The Wampanoag people, who have lived here since the 300s, feared the swamp. They believed it was home to Hockomock, the fearsome deity of death and disease. When the English came to the area, the Wampanoag were fully exposed to an evil spirit. The Europeans first well-received a Wampanoag chief named Metacomet. He wore their clothes, traded with the English, and even took the name Philip and the title of king. But this was only part of his cunning plan. He obtained firearms and supplied them to his tribe. The chief diligently trained Europeans in blacksmithing so that he could start making knives and axes for his relatives. When Metacomet felt strong enough to resist, he went to war with the colonizers. The chief wanted to expel all white people from their native land. As a result, the Indians inflicted significant damage on the British, killing 1 in 5. But the Wampanoags themselves suffered even worse. Almost the entire tribe was exterminated, including Metacomet himself. This war was the bloodiest in the history of Native American confrontation with colonizers. Most of these bloody events took place within the Bridgewater Triangle, so many explain the presence of anomalies because the triangle is a solid Indian cemetery. And as Stephen King taught us, if there's an Indian cemetery, you shouldn't bury anyone else there. But as far as Native Americans are concerned, another anomaly associated with them is worth mentioning. A young man in the triangle town of Raynham had gone for a walk with his dog. The weather was fine, the smell of pine was in the air, filling his lungs with autumnal freshness. While he was admiring the beauty of the area, his dog had disappeared into the thick of the forest. He ran off in search of his pet, calling his name, but he didn't respond. After 20 minutes of searching, he found the dog in a daze and whimpering softly as if he was about to be put to sleep. The boy followed his pet's gaze and was about to be stunned himself. Standing in the autumn foliage was a strange humanoid creature, a little less than 1.5 meters tall. His skin was gray, smooth, hairy, and his ears were disproportionately large. The monster was covered in needles like a porcupine. Seeing him being watched, the creature snorted something and then vanished. The boy didn't know how to live his life anymore. He wanted to talk about what had happened, but he was afraid he would be fired from his job, and his friends and family would call him crazy. He kept this burden to himself for 20 years, until he met Aaron Cadeau, the director of a documentary about the Bridgewater Triangle, and learned more about the strange creature from him. These troll-like creatures are called pukwudgies and are mentioned in Wampanoag folklore. According to Indian beliefs, these creatures used to be friends of man, but then something went wrong. The Pakwahi have gone deep into the forest and now lure people there, kidnap them, and kill them. They wield poisonous arrows and magical powers. They have not only been encountered by Cadeau's interlocutor, but many locals have also encountered them. Perhaps such eyewitnesses are local weirdos or people looking for cheap fame who are out of their minds. But what about the police sergeant? Is his testimony to be doubted? True, he's seen better things than Pakwaji. In 1980, Sergeant Thomas Downe was walking through the woods. Whether he was looking for Satanists, dangerous killers, or just enjoying an evening stroll, history is silent. The sergeant was very surprised when it suddenly went dark. It was still a long way from dusk, but it wasn't dusk at all. Downe looked up and saw a giant creature nearly 2 meters tall. Some people speculated that Downe had seen a living pterodactyl. Why not? It was not unusual for such places. Others thought the sergeant had discovered the Thunderbird, another character from Native American mythology. If you were to list all the anomalies people have encountered in this triangle, our video would be endless. Bigfoot, UFOs, occult sects, and more. This place has arguably become the center of attraction for everything unusual you can think of. But what's the reason there are so many oddities here? Why is everyone so scared of this place? Some suggest the problem is a gravitational anomaly. Others blame it on the abundance of quartz in the area. Others believe the bloody Metacomet War left too much negative energy there. We think it's just a successful cocktail of masses of spooky stories, a dark, mysterious landscape, and a pinch of human imagination. What do you think? Write it in the comments.